Hey everyone, we're going to do Chapter 11, Sex and Gender. If you haven't taken the title card down now, please do so. All right, I'm going to move on. We're going to talk about gender difference. In sociology, we generally attribute difference in gender to society and the environment. Now, there has been some building evidence of some biological components that kind of work in tandem with the environment. In your vocab, you'll be asked to reflect on a question. It looks at two scenarios of a person that was born and lost their penis, and Vietnam veterans come back from the war, and maybe that there's some biological component that kind of pushed people in a general direction of how they kind of feel and that type of thing. But most of the evidence kind of shows that gender difference is an environmental influence, and that essentially, people feel how they feel. They have this, and this has been historical. This has been documented of the feeling of gender. What is feminine? What is masculine? Right? It's based on how society places those things. So it's nothing that's ingrained into someone of masculinity, of femininity. Women have to be feminine and are feminine. That's a societal construct of what feminine is. And men have to be masculine, or masculinity is male. That's a social construct of how society places that. So that's kind of the main influence there, and we'll kind of dig into it a bit here. So go ahead and take this down now. So let's talk about gender inequality globally. So females are defined as a minority, despite them actually having more numbers than men in terms of pure numbers, right? And again, this is based on discrimination, right? A minority group doesn't necessarily mean less, but discrimination due to that factor. In this case, it's gender. And so you may have heard the term the patriarchy. The patriarchy is a male-dominated society. And this is something that started very early in world history. There's some speculation. It's due to childbirth, to short mortality rates. So there's obviously a biological difference of women bearing children, which definitely had a higher mortality rate, much higher in early world history. And so in terms of pure numbers, there were more men than women that lived because of that. And so that led to a male-dominated society of men being more risky in terms of behavior, hunting and that kind of thing, because women's risk was childbirth. That's kind of speculative and may have led to gender differences. But what we do know is that societies became male-dominated, that males dominated politics, power, prestige, things like that. Today, how do we view, are things still a patriarchy? And sociology says yes. And basically, across different cultures, certain activities were asked of those cultures, which ones are more, kind of men, more deemed more for men, and which ones are deemed more for women. And ultimately, depending on culture, there are different activities that are deemed for men, deemed for women, but they aren't the same across cultures. Cooking might be deemed more of a female activity for most cultures, but some, that's more of a male role. Things like hunting are not exclusively quote unquote male determined activities or jobs or roles. Certain cultures, women hunt. That's mainly a female, a woman's job. So because that differs, it kind of shows that there are some kind of issues with how we separate those. It's not based on the job itself, so it's not biological, it's societal. But whatever roles are deemed more for men, whatever those are, in that specific culture or society, generally hold more prestige, and that's therein lies the issue, right? That these jobs aren't viewed equally; they're viewed unequally, and men get the benefit of that doubt. So, some we'll talk about more later as well. Let's go on to the next slide. So I kind of got into this a little bit of sex typing of work, right? Of societal activities men's work and women's work differ between cultures, and that prestige is definitely the issue. So we see. So we start to see gaps form and develop around the world in things like education, and so I put that on there. Looks like I didn't put the other pieces in terms of writing it down, but I'll talk about them a bit. So that we see gaps in education, we see gaps in politics, we see gaps in a couple different things. In terms of gender gap in pay, we'll get into that. Global violence against women, we'll get into that. So, education and politics are probably two that I won't talk about too much later. But, education, there's about 1 billion adults around the world that can't read. 2/3 of them are women, right? So there are societies where women aren't given the same educational opportunities as men. That's that's a patriarchy, right? Politics, right? 2008 was the first time that a country in the world elected more women than men to their legislature. First time in the world, any country. That was Rwanda. So women are underrepresented in politics because there are more women than men in the world. And in some countries, women making up legislative bodies is as low as 1%. It can be pretty harsh. So there are definitely some gender gaps around the world as well. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So feminism is an aspect that's, I think, today is misinterpreted. Feminism faced a lot of opponents when it first came out, right, who were fighting for that power in society, keep women out of power. And today a lot try to continue to miscategorize feminism as radical, as trying to put women above men, and it's never been the case. And sometimes that reflection can be like, if women want this thing, that you can convince yourself that men don't have that thing, but generally some men don't have to worry about, and that's the difference. Now, there have been 3 waves of feminism. First, the goal was to gain the right to vote in democracies. We saw that here in America in the late 19th century through 1920. Second wave was fight for equality in work conditions, that women would have better pay, as we'll talk about, still not equal, and that that would occur, as well as conditions to work in and what those are. The third wave is focusing a lot on less industrialized nations, helping women in those places, changing the work ideals. Like, we kind of hold these ideals that are generally viewed as quote unquote more, men's work, once again, of kind of ruggedness and this like high effort and working through things like that. These male qualities of cooperation, of interdependence, of toughness, of callous emotion, of independence. Whereas trying to replace those with things that are more connected, like cooperation, connection, openness, interdependence, is the goal. So that's kind of where we're at with that. And focusing on women's sexual pleasure, right? Sexual revolution happened, and sex has been maybe an area that is also, where women's sexual pleasure is less accepted to be talked about, less accepted to be out in the open, or, and that's an issue. Let's go on to the next slide. Everyday life.